The first time Kai almost kissed Julian, it was raining so hard neither of them could hear the other's heartbeat, but they could feel it, chest to chest, in the doorway of a closed bookstore at midnight. "Say something," Julian whispered, his forehead nearly touching Kai's. Kai didn't say anything. He just stared at Julian's mouth like it was the only warm thing left in the world, and for 3 full seconds, the rain seemed to stop mattering. Then a car horn blared down the street, and the moment shattered like glass. That was 4 months before everything fell apart. This is the story of how it happened, and how, maybe, it started to come back together. Kai Ashworth had known Julian Reyes since they were 14 years old, back when Julian was the new kid who didn't know how to open his locker, and Kai was the only one who didn't laugh about it. They'd been inseparable ever since, through high school graduation, through Julian's father's funeral, through the summer Kai broke his arm skateboarding, and Julian carried his backpack for 6 weeks straight without complaint. By the time they were 22, sharing a cramped 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in the city, their friendship had the kind of gravity that made other people jealous. Roommates joked they were basically married. Coworkers assumed they'd known each other their whole lives, because who else remembers exactly how you take your coffee, or notices when you've had a bad day before you've said a word? Kai worked as a junior architect at a firm downtown, all sharp lines and late nights. Julian taught guitar lessons out of a tiny studio and played open mics on weekends, chasing a dream that paid in applause more often than money. They balanced each other, Kai's order against Julian's chaos, Julian's warmth against Kai's guardedness. What nobody knew, not their friends, not their families, not even, for a long time, themselves, was that somewhere between the shared groceries and the late-night talks on the fire escape, friendship had quietly become something else. Kai noticed it first. He noticed it in the specific ache of watching Julian laugh at something someone else said, and the sharper, uglier feeling that came when that someone else touched Julian's arm too long. He noticed it in the way his own hands went cold when Julian fell asleep against his shoulder during movie nights, both of them pretending it was nothing. He told himself it was nothing for a long time. He was good at telling himself things. Julian noticed it differently, in the absence of things. In the way Kai used to tease him mercilessly, and had slowly stopped. In the way Kai's eyes lingered a half-second too long before flicking away, like he'd caught himself doing something forbidden. In the way Kai had started keeping a careful, deliberate distance on the couch, a full cushion's width, where once there'd been none at all. Julian didn't have a name for it either. He just knew that somewhere in the last year, being near Kai had started to feel like standing too close to a fire, warm and dangerous at the same time, and he didn't know if he wanted to step back or step in. They never talked about it. That was the unspoken rule that governed their whole friendship. Some things were better left in the dark, where they couldn't be examined, where they couldn't be lost. It was late September when the rain started, the kind of sudden city-wide downpour that turns umbrellas inside out and sends strangers running for shared awnings. Kai and Julian had been walking home from Julian's open mic, Kai still buzzing with pride from watching Julian perform an original song for the first time in months, when the sky simply opened. "Bookstore!" Julian shouted, grabbing Kai's wrist and pulling him under the narrow overhang of Halden Company. Booksellers, closed for the night, its windows dark and fogged. They stood pressed into the small dry space, laughing, soaked through, Julian's dark hair plastered to his forehead, Kai's glasses beaded with rain he couldn't be bothered to wipe away. The street had emptied. It was just the two of them, the hiss of rain on pavement, and the closeness either of them had chosen, but neither of them moved to escape. "You were really good tonight," Kai said, quieter now. Julian's smile faltered into something more honest. "You always say that." "Because it's always true." Something shifted in Julian's expression, a kind of unguarded vulnerability Kai rarely got to see, the mask of easy charms slipping just slightly. "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" "Look at me like I'm the only thing worth looking at." Kai's breath caught. He could have laughed it off. He could have made a joke, the way he always did when things got too close to the truth. Instead, for reasons he couldn't fully explain even to himself, he stepped closer. "Maybe you are," Kai said. The rain roared around them. Julian's eyes searched Kai's face like he was looking for permission, or maybe for proof that this was real and not some trick of exhaustion and adrenaline. His hand came up, hesitant, and rested against the damp fabric of Kai's jacket, right over his racing heart. "Say something," Julian whispered. Kai's whole body ached with how badly he wanted to close that final inch. He could feel Julian's breath, warm against the cold rain-soaked air, could see every raindrop caught in his eyelashes. 3 seconds stretched into something enormous, unbearable, filled with 4 years of feelings neither of them had ever said out loud. Then a car horn blared, sharp and sudden, as a taxi swerved around a puddle down the street. Both of them flinched. The spell broke. Julian stepped back first, laughing shakily, running a hand through his soaked hair. We should get home before we catch pneumonia." "Yeah," Kai said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Yeah, let's go." They walked the rest of the way in charged, unbearable silence, shoulders occasionally brushing, either of them mentioning what had almost happened, both of them thinking of nothing else. The days after the almost kiss were the strangest of Kai's life. Nothing had technically changed. They still made coffee together every morning, still argued over whose turn it was to do dishes, still sat on the fire escape some nights talking about nothing and everything. But there was a new current running underneath it all, a live wire either of them dared to touch again. Kai caught himself staring more. He caught Julian staring back, then looking away too fast, a flush climbing his neck. Once, reaching for the same mug in the cabinet, their hands collided, and neither of them moved away for a full 3 seconds, fingers overlapping, before Julian cleared his throat and stepped back with an apology that sounded more like a question. It should have been the moment where they finally talked. Instead, they did what 2 frightened, stubborn men do best. They avoided it entirely. Julian started picking up more gigs, staying out later. Kai buried himself in a big project at the firm, the kind that justified working until midnight and falling asleep before Julian even got home. It wasn't cruelty. It was fear, wearing the mask of busyness, and they were both fluent in that particular disguise. "You've been weird," said Priya, Kai's coworker and closest friend at the firm, one evening as they packed up their desks. "Weirder than usual, I mean." "I'm fine." "You've redrawn that stairwell detail 4 times. Nobody redraws a stairwell 4 times unless they're avoiding something at home." Kai didn't answer, which was answer enough. Priya, mercifully, didn't push, she just squeezed his shoulder on her way out and said, "Whatever it is, running from it usually makes it heavier, not lighter." He thought about that on the walk home, rain-slicked streets glowing under streetlights, and wondered when exactly he'd started running from the person who used to be his safest place to land. Julian, for his part, had taken to talking about it, carefully, elliptically, with the one person who never judged him for it, his older sister, Marisol, over the phone on nights when the apartment felt too quiet with Kai gone. "You like him," she said, not a question. "I don't know what I feel." "Julian, you've been talking about this boy since you were 14 years old. I watched you cry when he broke his arm like you'd broken your own. I think you know exactly what you feel. You're just scared of what it means. What if I ruin it? What if I say something and he doesn't feel the same, and then I lose the only real friendship I've ever had?" Marisol was quiet for a moment. "And what if you don't say anything, and you lose it anyway, just slower, and with both of you pretending you don't notice it disappearing?" Julian didn't have an answer for that. He just watched the city lights blur through the window, and wondered how something could feel like drowning and coming up for air at the exact same time. 3 weeks passed like this, charged silences, careful distances, a friendship stretched thin over an unspoken truth. And then Marcus happened. Marcus was a photographer Julian had met at one of his shows, all easy confidence and unreasonably good cheekbones, the kind of man who made flirting look effortless. He started showing up to Julian's open mics. He started texting. And Julian, hurt, confused, and tired of waiting for a moment that might never come again, let himself be flattered. Kai noticed the texts first. Then the late nights that weren't gig nights. Then, one Friday, Julian came home glowing in a way that had nothing to do with performance adrenaline. and something in Kai's chest cracked clean down the middle. "Good night?" Kai asked, trying to keep his voice light and failing badly. "Yeah," Julian said, dropping his keys in the bowl by the door, still smiling at his phone. "Marcus took me to this rooftop bar after my set. You'd have liked it. Sounds fun." The words came out flatter than Kai intended. Julian looked up, finally registering Kai's expression. "You okay?" "I'm fine. Tired. Long day." Kai retreated to his room before Julian could ask anything else, and lay awake for hours listening to Julian's muffled laughter through the wall as he talked to Marcus on the phone, feeling something ugly and unfamiliar coiling in his stomach, a jealousy so sharp it scared him. He told himself it wasn't fair. Julian deserved happiness. Julian deserved someone who could say things out loud instead of nearly kissing him in a doorway and then pretending it never happened. If Kai had really wanted this, he should have said so weeks ago, in the rain, when he'd had the chance. But wanting something and being brave enough to reach for it, Kai was learning, were two very different things. The weeks that followed were the coldest the apartment had ever felt, and it had nothing to do with the dropping October temperatures outside. Julian and Marcus became a real thing. Dates, introductions to Julian's friends, a growing warmth on Julian's phone screen that Kai tried very hard not to notice and failed every single time. Kai threw himself deeper into work. He started staying at Priya's more, using her guest room as an excuse to avoid the apartment, avoid Julian's happiness, avoid the mirror that made him confront exactly why it hurt so much. "You have to tell him," Priya said one night, watching Kai stare blankly at blueprints he wasn't actually reading. "Or you have to let it go. But this, whatever this is, where you just quietly suffer next to him, this isn't sustainable, Kai. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. It's just not easy. Those are different things." Kai didn't respond. He'd gotten very good, over the past month, at not responding to the things that mattered most. Julian, meanwhile, was discovering that Marcus, charming, attentive, easy Marcus, could not fill the specific, aching space that Kai's absence had left behind. He found himself comparing every laugh, every touch, every quiet moment to a doorway in the rain that he couldn't stop thinking about no matter how hard he tried. It came to a head on a Tuesday night in late October. Marcus had come by the apartment for the first time, and the evening had been pleasant enough. Dinner, wine, easy conversation, until Kai came home earlier than expected and found them on the couch, Marcus's hand resting on Julian's knee. Something in Kai's face must have shown, because Julian was on his feet in an instant. "Kai. I forgot something," Kai said, already backing toward the door, his voice carefully, brutally even. "I'll grab it later. Don't let me interrupt." "Kai, wait." But Kai was already gone, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that made Julian's stomach drop. He found Marcus's hand still on his knee and, for the first time, felt nothing but the wrongness of it. "I think you should go," Julian said quietly. "Is this about your roommate?" Julian looked at him, really looked at him, at this kind, patient, entirely undeserving man, and felt a wave of guilt so strong it nearly knocked him over. "It's not fair to you if it is. And I think it is. I'm sorry, Marcus. I really am." Marcus left without much argument, with the quiet dignity of someone who'd suspected this was coming. And Julian sat alone in the too quiet apartment, staring at the door Kai had walked out of, finally admitting to himself what he'd been too afraid to say out loud. He wasn't in love with a photographer with good cheekbones. He'd been in love, for longer than he could even trace, with his best friend. The question was whether it was already too late to say so. Kai didn't come home that night. He sat on the cold metal steps of the fire escape outside Priya's apartment, phone in his hand, 3 unread texts from Julian glowing on the screen, and couldn't make himself open a single one. "I'm sorry. Marcus is gone." It wasn't fair to him either. "Can we talk when you're ready?" "I'll wait as long as you need." Kai read them eventually, somewhere around 2 a.m., his thumb hovering over the reply button for 20 minutes before he finally set the phone face down and stared up at a sky too bright with city light to show any real stars. He thought about the doorway in the rain. He thought about 4 years of a friendship he'd been too afraid to risk, and how he'd nearly lost it anyway, just by staying silent. He thought about the particular cruelty of loving someone quietly enough that they never even got the choice to love you back. Somewhere around dawn, he finally understood what Priya had meant. Running from it hadn't made it lighter. It had only made the distance between them heavier, and colder, and harder to cross with every day he waited. Kai didn't go home for 3 days. He told himself it was to give Julian space, but the truth was simpler and harder to admit. He was terrified. Terrified of what saying the truth out loud might cost him, and terrified, in some smaller and more painful way, of what staying silent already had. It was Marisol, of all people, who finally intervened. She showed up at Priya's building on the 3rd evening, having gotten the address from Julian without telling him, and found Kai sitting on the front steps with his jacket collar turned up against the wind. "You don't know me," she said, sitting down beside him without asking permission, "but I've heard about you for 8 years. Kai this, Kai that. My brother has been half in love with you since we were kids, and I'm fairly certain you know that." Kai's throat tightened. "It's not that simple." "Everyone keeps telling me things aren't simple," Marisol said, not unkindly. "But from where I'm sitting, it looks pretty simple. 2 people who love each other are sitting in separate apartments, too scared to say so, while the thing they're most afraid of losing slips away anyway. That's not complicated. That's just sad. What if I tell him and it changes everything? What if I lose him completely?" Marisol looked at him with a gentleness that undid something in his chest. "Kai, you already are losing him. The version of your friendship where you don't say this, that version is already gone. The only question left is whether you lose him to silence, or you take the risk and maybe, just maybe, gain something better instead." She left him with that, and a scrap of paper with Julian's schedule for the next evening. He had a solo show at the small venue where they'd first started, the same one from the night of the rain. Kai sat with her words long into the night, and for the first time in weeks, felt something other than fear. He felt, cautiously, something that might have been hope. The venue was warm and dim, filled with the low hum of conversation and the smell of coffee, when Kai slipped in near the back just as Julian took the small stage with his guitar. Julian hadn't seen him yet. His face was tired in a way Kai recognized instantly, the specific exhaustion of someone who hadn't been sleeping either. "This next one's new," Julian said into the microphone, voice a little rough. "I've been sitting on it for a while. Didn't know if I'd ever actually play it." He began to play, and within the first few lines, Kai's chest went tight, because he recognized every image in the song: a doorway, rain, a hand over a racing heart, a horn that broke a moment that should never have ended. Julian was singing about him. Julian was singing about them, about every unsaid thing between them, in front of a room full of strangers because he hadn't been brave enough to say it to Kai's face. The song ended to warm applause, and Julian, scanning the crowd with a small, worn smile, finally found Kai's eyes across the room. Everything in the room seemed to fall away. Julian set down his guitar carefully, said something quick to the sound tech, and walked straight down from the stage through the crowd, not stopping until he was standing directly in front of Kai, both of them breathing like they'd been running. "You heard that," Julian said. "It wasn't a question. Every word. I've been trying to write the courage to say it to your face for a month. Turns out it's easier to say it to a room full of strangers than to you." Kai's heart was hammering so loudly he was certain Julian could hear it. "Why?" "Because if I said it to you and you didn't feel the same, I didn't think I could survive watching your face while you tried to let me down gently." Julian's voice cracked slightly on the last word. "I'm sorry about Marcus. I used him to run from what I actually wanted, and that wasn't fair to him or to you or to me. I've been in love with you for so long I don't actually remember what it felt like before. And I am so tired, Kai, of pretending that isn't true." The room around them blurred into background noise, clinking cups, a barista calling out a name, the low murmur of other conversations. None of it mattered. There was only Julian, standing close enough to touch, finally saying out loud the thing they'd both been drowning in silence for months. I walked out that door because I couldn't watch someone else touch you the way I wanted to, Kai said, his voice unsteady but certain. I've been running from this since we were 19, Julian. I think some part of me has loved you since before I even understood what that meant. I was just so afraid of losing you that I nearly lost you anyway. Julian let out a shaky, disbelieving laugh, something between relief and heartbreak. So what happens now? Kai reached out, slow and deliberate, and took Julian's hand, the same hand that had once rested against his racing heart in a doorway in the rain. Now I stop being afraid. He leaned in. This time, there was no car horn, no interruption, no 4 years of unsaid things standing between them. There was only the warmth of Julian's hand in his, the soft exhale against his lips, and the kiss that 4 years, one rainstorm, and one terrifying, honest song had finally earned. It was gentle. It was overdue. It felt, to both of them, like coming home. Around them, a few people clapped, having watched the whole thing unfold, and Julian laughed against Kai's mouth, pulling back just enough to rest his forehead against Kai's the way he had that night in the rain. I've been so scared of this, Julian whispered. Me too, Kai admitted. But I don't want to be scared anymore. Not of this. Not of you. They didn't fix everything that night. 4 years of silence doesn't unravel in a single kiss, and both of them knew there would be conversations still to have, fears still to work through, old habits of self-protection that wouldn't disappear overnight. But they walked home together under a clear sky for once, hands linked, in no particular hurry, and for the first time in months, the distance between them was gone. Marisol got a photo that night, Julian's request, sent with 3 heart emojis and the caption finally. Priya got a text from Kai the next morning that simply read, I told him. She replied within seconds, about time. Details? Now. The apartment above the laundromat felt different in the weeks that followed, not because anything about the walls or the furniture had changed, but because the silence that used to sit heavy in every room had finally lifted. They still argued about dishes. Kai still redrew things 4 times when he was anxious, though now Julian would wander into his home office and rest a hand on his shoulder until the anxiety eased. Julian still played guitar late into the night, but now Kai fell asleep to it instead of lying awake wondering what he was too afraid to say. They told their families slowly, carefully, in their own time, met with more warmth than either of them had dared hope for, though Kai's mother did cry for a solid 10 minutes, mostly from relief that her son had finally stopped hiding something she'd suspected for years. 6 months later, on the anniversary of that first rainstorm, they stood together in the exact same doorway of Halden Company. Booksellers, closed for the night once again, though this time neither of them was running from anything. You know, Julian said, tucking a strand of damp hair back from Kai's forehead, I used to think that almost kiss ruined everything. It didn't ruin anything, Kai said. It just made us wait for the version we actually deserved. Julian smiled, the real smile, the one that didn't hide anything anymore. Say something. Kai didn't hesitate this time. I love you. I should have said it in this exact spot 4 months ago. You're saying it now, Julian said softly, closing the distance between them. That's what matters. This time, there was no car horn. There was only rain, and warmth, and 2 people who'd finally stopped being afraid of the truth behind each other's smiles. If this story moved you, don't scroll past without hitting subscribe. More stories like Kai and Julian's are coming, and you won't want to miss them. Drop a like if you were rooting for them from that very first doorway, and tell me in the comments what almost moment in your own life you wish you'd been brave enough to finish. There's more to Kai and Julian's story than what you just read: the wedding, the family who still needed convincing, the night it almost fell apart again for good.